Hey everybody, Brian Raisin coming at you live again from campus today. I've just come outside. I'm right by the iconic library. There's your main library on campus. Right behind me is Mirror Lake, absolutely beautiful. It's been redone in the last few years. And I'm outside of Lazenby Hall. So it used to be languages. I'm not sure if it still is or not. Part two, wanted to jump in and do part two of our teaching video. So let me share my screen. Again, I'm going to fly through this really quickly as if we were in class, though we're not, and talk about improving our non-formal teaching. So before we get started though, quick question. Do you have a bucket list? Or think about your bucket list if you have one. Maybe it's formally written down, maybe it's just in your head. Is it personal for fun, or is it more professional for goals? So think about that in your mind. If we were online or in person, I might have you write it down or share it in the chat. Then we would listen to each other's and probably laugh about a few of the things. But then I would ask the summary question. This is that meta level, okay? So imagine yourself doing this. What strikes you about the responses? What are you seeing when you hear people talk about their bucket list? It's futuristic, it's hopeful, usually very positive things, and those are connecting things. So last time I talked about stories and how stories connect us. Today, I want to talk more about that. So you can use this as an opener. It can last for 5 minutes to 25 minutes, depending, but bucket lists encourage possibility. They help us think about the future. They can improve our work by focusing on what matters. I can go into a lot more detail, but this is just kind of the intro. So for this part two, I want to jump in and talk about being vulnerable, building trust, being transparent, getting that detail so your students really know what to expect, particularly when you're hybrid or distant. And then talking about psychological needs for safety, and then owning your curriculum through practice. So first, vulnerability. So again, I wish we were either in class or even Zooming, because I like to crowdsource and always learn from my students. What have you seen in vulnerability, or have you experienced or tried showing some vulnerability to your students? I have shared my failed writing attempts earlier in my career, but some actually, even today, you get some reviewer number two just cuts you to pieces, and you're like, oh my gosh, have I forgotten how to write after 25 years and however many publications? But when I share that with my students, I say, I want you to know that I am a person too, and that I make mistakes, and when I don't do the time, I failed. I don't want that to happen to you. And when I tell them that, it gets their attention. I say, that's the reason I'm going to write on your papers. I'm going to redline them. I don't want you to fail. And so that's a big vulnerability piece. I think my students tell me it helps in building trust. And that's not just formal, but in my non-formal teaching as well. So what's transparency? Helping them have that conscious understanding of how they learn. Now, educators don't do this very often either. So this may be unique. I think you know it because most of you are educators. But talk to them about Bloom and Bloom's taxonomy, about think significant learning. Tell them why you're assigning a reflective paper so that they get that cements the learning and helps them understand the concepts that they can then put into practice. Articulating the rubrics, the metrics, the syllabus, these details really helps make your class more transparent and much more approachable and open to you as the teacher, whether it's formal classroom, again, or a lesson plan that you're doing. So again, most students don't know about Bloom. But when we explain, we want you to learn. The reason we're teaching this is so that one, you'll get knowledge, but then you'll understand it, which is that application, and learn how you can use it. This is where extensions magic is. Anybody can Zoom or Google anything and gain information, but how you put it into practice, how you comprehend it and use it and analyze it, that's the difference. So when we tell our students this, we're helping them understand the learning process, and we don't do that very often. Again, they think just a different way of doing it. Sometimes I use think more with adult audiences. It depends on the topic and the formality of the course or whatever class that I might be teaching for extension or formally here on campus. So how might you add transparency in your class? Again, just something to ponder since we're on video at this time. Some ideas that I've thrown out in the past. Check your approach. What assumptions are in your syllabus or in your lesson plan? Sorry, this was for more formal teaching with some other colleagues at another university. What assumptions are in your lesson plan? The details matter, particularly when we shifted to online. And as we continue with some online and some hybrid, we're going to need to make sure that we explain those in much greater students. What assumptions are in your language in the rubrics? Saying things matter, out loud matter. And so telling them that you want to learn with them. I do this a lot, especially with my graduate students. It's really powerful. Just a quick example of my 8420. It's a class I teach on leadership. So I give them details of what we're going to cover. I give them content reminders and to-do items and so that it's very clear, because it can be confusing when you're trying to work through a lesson plan or an online plan for an entire semester. 2 hours is enough as well, holy cow. But also the humanness piece of it. I try to keep grace as a foundation, that people make mistakes, and I might too. So I don't take offense if somebody tells me or lets me know. And I try to model that both ways. Andragogy, pedagogy, you guys know this stuff, but it's good to just think about it sometimes because we don't always do that. So what's your approach when you're working more with adults, which would include high school and college students? They're more experiential oriented. They've got experience that they're bringing to your classroom or your lesson. And so you need to remember that and ask them to share that. That really helps bring them into it as they're picking up or learning and cementing that knowledge. It can be really powerful. You can pause and take a look at this at your leisure. It's just a real good outline real quickly on pedagogy versus andragogy. Some good stuff in there. What I'm always looking for are these intersections, the strategic places where the theory meets the practice. That's where I try to live, because that's where I call it magic. That's where learning can really happen when they see it. Just this semester at a formal class that I'm teaching here on campus. I've had students say, I read this, I heard the lecture, and it was like, yeah. But then when we saw the real example, it's usually a guest lecture, somebody else, that brings that real example, then they really get it. And it makes sense and resonates. And that's when the learning, that's when it happens. So vulnerability, transparency, building trust. Do what you do what you would do in class, explaining the learning materials, contextualizing them so that the students understand what this module is about, what this club meeting or this teaching that we're doing is about. How did I start this? I started with a question. I asked you about bucket lists. Do you have one? Hopefully that got your mind spinning just a little bit and engaged you a little bit in a way, because that's what you want to do before you start content. Connecting before content, as I talked a lot in the last video about. Facilitate active learning, great interaction so that students can connect with you, with each other, giving collaborative opportunities in a grad class instead of having one big discussion board, which is crazy. I break students up into smaller groups. You can do the same in your meetings, and you guys know all this stuff, like I said. Challenge yourself to learn new techniques. I'm frequently looking for and talking with colleagues about things that they've used, ideas that I can steal and use in my work and my teaching. And then I also ask my students pretty frequently, both formal and informal. I don't just mean campus here, but my extension audiences, that is the majority of my teaching. What ideas do you have? How can we make this better? How can we engage? And so those are things that you can do too. Again, just review. Caring for y'all. First stretch, if you're sitting, do a stretch, let everybody look at you, fun stuff. I have a colleague that teaches a chemistry lab or lesson with like 100 or 200 students, I don't remember, it's a lecture hall. And they do like yoga poses and the students love it. They have to get used to it, but then they're like, oh, we need to have our yoga break. So anyway, all right. Maslow. What? What? Yeah, it's a reminder again, because we don't explicitly stop and think about this all the time. With the distance learning through 2020 and the beginning of 2021, Maslow's hierarchy shifted some. Once those physiological needs are met, when you're engaging online, feeling safe and the social ability to speak up, to unmute your microphone and turn on your camera become bigger than physiological needs, which we would normally think. So those are just things to keep in the back of your mind. Being diverse deliberately, including your language, not just t-shirt color, as my joke there. Be intentional, use photos in your slides that represent all of our students. Use inclusive language deliberately. Yeah, the iceberg, don't roll your eyes, I know. But when I see this, I remember myself, oh yeah, I'm only seeing a really small part of that student, of that youth member, whoever it may be. Online, it's even less. And there's all this other weight beneath them, the rest of them that makes up the person. And so taking the time to pause and to think about that can really change how we engage with our students. It can be really powerful. How do you promote diversity in online teaching? Again, being deliberate, inclusive language. Number one, words matter. Work to understand your audience. Do universal design. So if you're planning a program, build the diversity into it, build the inclusiveness into it as you're designing. Don't go back and retrofit. Change up your teaching strategies, your materials, structure the course for equal opportunities for all students, celebrate diversity in your examples, encourage participation. I just saw this in March from this guy I follow. Burnison's the CEO of Korn Ferry International, multi-billion-dollar company, I don't even know. But he does a special edition on Sundays. And he talked about fitting in. But he says fitting in superficial, slipping into a room. The power of belonging is bigger. It's inclusive and participative. That is really, it struck me when I thought about my extension audiences, my on-campus audiences, and how I need to create a sense of belonging in order for them to ramp up the ability to really learn and to retain whatever the lesson may be. So I just throw that out. Final thought, own your curriculum. So if you know the content, then your mind is much more free to literally, serendipitously interject real life examples to better hear the questions that your students are asking instead of thinking about, oh, I got to get this next point. It's really powerful to practice. It takes time, yes, but it's a really powerful technique. So cement the learning, this is old school stuff. Draw a triangle. What are 3 things you learn? What's squared away in your mind? What's something still circling that you're not sure about? Share that. It's just a technique, and you guys do this stuff all the time. So key takeaways for these first 2 videos. VARC, which we don't think about very often, but we should. Different smarts, the register, how we connect before we present content, those meaningful openers and exercises. What brought you joy this week? What's life teaching you right now? Things like that can really help bring people together before you jump in. And then today, or this second part, vulnerability, building trust, being transparent, helping your students and owning the curriculum. So again, super fast. Tune in next time, 2 more videos on creating engaged learning and then some humanizing strategies. So, homework, I forgot. I can't let you go without homework. Go outside. Like this, it's gorgeous today. Watch other videos and TED Talks and get other ideas and breathe in and realize things are getting better. So thanks for watching. I hope it's helpful.